Okay, hello. So that, oops, probably can hear me now. Turns up a bit. Right, okay. So I'm not available on Monday, so I wanted to do the first of the what I've said will be 6 hours of openings, and I'm sure you'll be really sick of me after the 6 hours of openings. But I wanted to start actually with openings for black because a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I think it's a little bit more important, whatever level you're at, because black starts second, of course, so you're basically half a tempo behind, so you have to be a little bit more accurate than if you are um, playing white. So, what am I going to recommend? So, the study that I have put together is I've called it the Jobava Benoni Indian. So, this is, I said in the first video, if you were watching, that I would do repertoires for black and white, and for the black repertoire, I would base it upon the King's Indian, which is sort of true. But what I really like about the Benoni Indian, which if you've never heard of Benoni Indian, don't worry, I'll explain everything. Um, it is a common pawn break. You always play c5, always. But what you find when you look at the lines is white can basically do the same setups that they do against the King's Indian because we're going to use a very specific move order. So let's dive right in. So d4, knight f6. This is the starting position for all of the Indian defences I talked about. In the introduction, we had the Nimzo Indian with e6, which tends to want to develop the bishop out to b4. We have the King's Indian with g6, bishop g7. And then we have the Benonis and the Benkos, which go with c5. Now, just a little nuance here that I have thought of. c4 is the most common move. However, if your opponent starts with knight f3, I recommend here using the move order g6. And the specific reason for this is because c5 here, d5 is a little bit better for white. Not committing to this c2, c4 is quite useful. And white develops a little bit quicker here. They also have the c4 square for this knight. Quite often the knight can come to d2 to c4. And what we'll see a lot of the time is we're getting a structure with a pawn on d6, and from c4 that knight's perfectly positioned to attack the d6 pawn, and also it controls e5, so f4, e4, e5 plans are a lot more dangerous. So I wouldn't recommend playing c5 here. If they go knight f3, just calmly develop the bishop and wait to see what they want to do. Because if they go through, they might not play c4. And if they don't play c4, I don't recommend playing c5. So general rule number one, only play c5 when c4 is on the board. So here we go, c5. And what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to refer to the Lead Chess database because that will be important. Here, you can see, if we go to master level, 90% everybody plays d5. If you play knight f3, you're probably just looking to avoid the Benoni or the Benko. But when the pawn is pushed to d5, the normal Benoni move order is pawn to e6 here. But I'll show you quickly why I don't recommend this. So e6 gives white an additional option, which we really, really want to avoid. A very dangerous option, in fact. So you can see take, d6. So you've got your Benoni pawn structure, e4. And you can see the computer's already giving white +1. So we go g6. So you're thinking, okay, no problem, we've got our Benoni Indian. Not quite. f4. Very dangerous system. It's called the pawn storm variation or the flick knife attack. And this is very, very dangerous for black. The reason being, the bishop g7, there's no pawn here. White's taken c takes d5. So this move, bishop b5 check, is available, which is extremely awkward to meet. It is a nightmare for black. If I knew I was going to face the Benoni, I would play d4 every game, because this opening for white is so good. And as you can see, the best move is this really horrible undeveloping move, knight fd7, which leaves black really, really cramped up here on the queen side. So little thing on move order there. But I like this g6 move order. It also fits very well with Sicilian Accelerated Dragon, which will be one of my other recommendations. So how does this change things? Right, so let's go back to the Lichess database. Everybody plays knight c3. It doesn't really matter if they play another move here, you're going to get the same position. And we go for our fianchetto. And now when e4 happens, white is threatening e5. So you have to stop this. So you play d6, control the e5 square. And knight f3 is main. Okay, we castle. And now I want to cover these chapters in the order of popularity in the Lichess database. And this is a very useful thing to do. You can see at master level, bishop e2 is the most popular move and probably objectively the best move for white. I'll turn the engine off for a bit and just keep this down here, because this will, when you turn the engine off, it will just give you all of the scores for all the moves. So we're going to cover bishop d3 first, which is the most common at the Lichess level. And I have got my, if we take out these ratings, for example, maybe leave the 1600 one in, because I imagine some of you guys will be facing more of these. You can see bishop d3 is the most popular by quite a margin. Okay, so after bishop d3, as soon as white's committed here, bishop g4. Key idea in the Benoni is trading minor pieces, because we have less space here. And the problem you have in this pawn structure is you don't have many squares for this light square bishop. So e6 and f5 are covered, as is h3. So that leaves you with 2 squares. And if you give white time to play h3, then you have a real problem with this bishop, because both the bishop and the knight want to be developed to this d7 square. So it's very, very important. Bishop d3, bishop g4, and this gives black a fine game. So we'll go through. I mean, white will castle. Doesn't really. I mean, they can. Other moves are possible, but as you can see, 50% of the time they'll do this, and 40% of the time they'll do this. And if they do this, then we just take. Simple. And they take, and we do the same thing. Put the knight on d7, and we have our standard position. Okay. So, yeah, you can see that takes. Oops, sorry, not here. So castles, and we go e6. So the reason we go e6 and we don't take on f3, the reason this is bad is because we're basically waiting for white to force us to take on f3. This bishop is no problem here because the knight doesn't really want this square. So we can play knight bd7. We have squares for all our minor pieces. This is good. I'll put these in green because every piece now has a square. So we go e6 because we want to get the structure with e takes d5, because this gives us an open e-file, first of all, and it gives white a target on d5. So h3, most played. We're going to chop. That's our signal to chop, because, I mean, you have no other moves. Anything else loses the bishop. Bishop h5, for example, g4 wins piece, so h3, simple enough, take. And ed5. Right, now, white has big choice here. The most popular and best move is to take with the e-pawn. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll look at c takes d5. Probably the most ambitious move, but I like the top move, knight bd7. And we want to go knight e5 and trade a pair of knights. Trading a pair of knights is usually a good thing, because when you have 2 knights connected like this, they kind of step on each other's toes a bit. So knight e5 is the threat. I'll put the threat in red, and it's going to fork these 2 pieces. Oops, not that square, that square. So we'll be better, in fact, if we exchange that. So white does this to control the square, and we go knight e5 anyway. White's best is to take. But this gives us a very nice and easy plan. So this is a pass pawn. Will be a bit of a downside, but what we can do is we can reach this blockading square, d6 with the knight. So pretty much after any white move, you want to go knight e8 to d6, and your basic plan once you've done those two things is to play f5. Sometimes you want to go a6 and b5 as well to gain space on the queen side. And you do these things and black is fine. It's a nice simple position to play. So that's with the c takes d5. If white plays e takes d5, a little bit more solid. Again, we go for this knight d7 and knight e5 is a threat. Most players here do play bishop f4. But here, this gives us a better version of what we've already seen. Knight e8 to d6 here. And the reason that this is better than the previous version is because there's no pawn on e4. Instead, it's on c4. And that gives us f5, e4 much more easily. And then knight e8 to d6, f5, e4 is unstoppable. This bishop is a monster. Black is already better. Well, the computer says white can equalize some funny looking moves like queen e3. But essentially, from a practical point of view, black is better here, which is nice. So queen d1, already not easy. Probably best, but not easy. And as you can see, Lee chess not played very often. And here we go for this because we don't want a pin happening and we want to release the f-pawn to take control of the e4 square. So this is kind of like white's threat, because if they get a bishop on f4 and a knight on e4, then it becomes quite tricky to defend the d6 pawn. This is the main idea for white. So basically we're playing against this. So knight e4 straight away. We can go for queen e7, which covers the d6 pawn. And after bishop g5, f6, bishop d2. No, the bishop f4 wasn't possible because we can simply take it. Now we can go knight e5. So we put pressure here and here. Nice little tactic here. Queen c2 is best, but white has to give back the bishop pair, which is nice. If bishop e2, we have a discovered attack. And bishop c4, queen takes e4. Black is a little better here. Oops, not that one. Black is a little better. I mean, you're a pawn up. You have easy play here. Next thing you want to do is open up this dark square bishop. Okay, right. So after queen c2, f5 again. Very common. We closed our dark square bishop, so we want to open it. And after white does this, bishop f6, knight e6, looks scary, but we have this all under control. We reroute this knight to challenge the knight on e6. And white doesn't really want to trade, because trading a pair of knights, as I've already said, is good. So queen f7. And now in this position, you want to take here. That's why we played queen e7 to unpin. And failing that, one simple plan is to double on the e-file. And you may consider launching a kingside pawn storm also with g5 in the future. Possibly being a little careful with this because the positioning of white's pieces. Maybe you want a6, b5 as well at some point to loosen the support for the d5 pawn. So all in all, this is a very, very playable position. It's very slightly better for white according to the computer, but again, it's really nothing to be concerned about. Let's look. I mean, the computer you can see flashed up g5 there as a potential option. This is also quite interesting. Although maybe it's better to get all the pieces into play. I mean, let's play normal. Let's say if white messes around, goes king h1 and brings the king back. Now g5, and you can see what black is better. If you ever back off, you lose this pawn. And if you trades are good for us. We can probably even take here. This is fine as well. And then you can play queen g6 and start a kingside attack. And eventually you will pick up this pawn. There you go. It's already a threat to pick up this pawn. So white is in some trouble here. Okay, so I would say black has the initiative for there for sure. All right then. So I'll promote this actually. Yeah, so bear in mind I made a couple of slow moves for white there just to illustrate the ideas that you want to control the e file and then play g5. But yeah, that's so good news is that after that little excerpt, we have covered what you're likely to face in around a third of your games. Okay, right. Next thing, classical systems. Classical because it resembles the classical of the king variation of King's Indian. So again, we start with c5, force that d5, then we develop our pieces like a King's Indian. When e4 comes, that's the signal to play d6. So I'm just going to make a little note here actually after e4. So yeah, you want to do this because you want to stop e4 to e5. And then after knight s3, again, we castle, complete development. Now bishop e2. Bishop e2 is a little tricky. The reason being that bishop g4 here isn't very good. And I'll show you why. So bishop g4, white plays h3, take, e6. They have this move e5 after taking in e5. And this actually happened in a game that I was watching live. And the problem is here, well, it's a double attack. E takes f6 is a threat, and bishop takes b7 is a threat. So this is lights out for black. So be very careful to get the move order correct here. So the reason that bishop g4 was good here was because we created a pin. And this bishop couldn't come to f3 with a quick e5. So in this classical variation, you have to be very careful. Castles is the move. Okay? And we wait for the bishop to develop, and we play e6. So we are going to eventually get the bishop to g4 if white allows it, but first of all, we're going to fix this structure. Force white to take, hopefully with the e pawn, so there's no e4, e5 business looming. Okay? So they castle. I'll have a look at h3 as well. Most people castle. We take, and we get the standard Benoni structure. Now with the pawn on e4, with the bishop on d3, this was less of a thing, but we like to develop with tempo. So you can play rook e8 here. Rook e8 is the most popular move. a6 is also sort of forcing a4. And you can play rook e8, that's fine, but bishop g4 is good because we want to trade that minor piece. So we're keeping consistent. The best thing to do here for white is to play knight d2 because in this structure the knight is better than this bishop because of the colour of the pawns. So this is white's bad bishop, so they want to get rid of this. We'll quite happily take. And we want to go knight e5 potentially, or knight b6. Sometimes also here you can play c4 and put the knight on c5 in specific situations. So knight c4 is main, and we go knight b6. Very important. In modern Benoni structures, we want to exchange a pair of knights. I've already spoken a little about this. Why? Because these knights kind of get on each other's toes, like being both of them want the d7 square essentially. We haven't got two good advanced squares to put them on. I mean, it's not realistic to get a knight here. So, importantly, knight b6. White's best not to trade. I'll show you from the computer evaluation instantly if they take. Black is on the verge of better. In fact, black wins 2 out of 3 games here at lead chess level. So, and if we go to the Masters database, same thing. Black wins 2 out of 3 games. We have no wins for white. This just shows you how sort of strategically dangerous. I will say that black is slightly better here with a very good win rate. So knight e3 is most natural. Queen e7. So again, we put pressure. And let's go back to lead chess a second. a5 is the most common move, I'm the best. Bring the knight back. And because white goes again to c4 with the knight, and again, what's the rule? Try and trade a pair of knights. Knight e5, knight b6. We go rook a8, bringing the rook to the e file, last piece into play, and also white was of course threatening to take the rook on a8. And after our threat here, if we can, is to play knight fd7 and force the trade of this knight. That would be good for us. So bishop g5 stops this, but we do it anyway. h6. Again, trades are good. g5, bishop g3, knight fd7. White has done this in a slightly better way because at least we've been forced to weaken the king a bit, but this is not a big issue. Because I'll show you that f4 is not a problem. So take, and f4. You want to respond to this by taking and putting the knight on g6, hitting this. So we look at the evaluation here, and the rook drops back. I mean, it doesn't go here because we have bishop d4. It's just a bad move. So let's not do that. Although always worth looking out for. So white has to go all the way back and then boom, f5, exploiting the pin. And black has a super active position here. White can't take. Best is queen h5, but I mean, you can probably play other moves here, but f4 is very good. Take. Rook f6. This is a computer line, so I won't go too much into this, but you can see that black has a very active position. You end up with this nice minor piece imbalance of your strong and opposed dark square bishop and loads of lovely dark squares to play with. Okay, so white has to be careful to maintain the balance there. Right, going back a little, there was this a5 move, which is quite a common strategic idea in these positions. You kind of want to play like this to clamp down, to stop black from playing this b5, because when you play b5 now, this en passant structure isn't too bad, but it's not fantastic either. You end up with quite a lot of weak pawns. I mean, you've got 3 pawn islands now compared to white's 2, and this pressure on the a file can be annoying in the long term. So first of all, rook e8. Well, we are going to play b5 because we need to, but now b5, which is better here because after a takes b6, knight takes b6, thanks to this pin, we do have a threat to take on d5 here, and that forces white to exchange knights, and black is again slightly better here. So this is good. Get rid of those lines. So the question is though, what happens if white takes the pawn on d6? Looks very good. It's very natural. No problem. Rook e7. Now we are threatening, and this knight is a little clumsy as well. It's not got any squares. This knight is stuck. No retreat squares, all controlled by black. Knight b7 would just be queen c7. So bishop f4, white support the knight, and black plays c4. I spoke about this idea a little earlier on. The other place you can put this knight is c5, and the reason this is so good is because the knight can come to d3, which is a very good square. We can also consider ideas to play the threat arrow. The knight c5 would be very good. So say white wastes a move with king h1, just to illustrate the idea, knight c5, and then say they play natural rook a d1, knight h5, and already this is some trouble because of the knight on d6 I mentioned. And this is a position that's very difficult for a club level player to play because white has, yeah sure, white has an extra pawn, but the extra pawn is blockaded by a piece that can't move. And black has all the activity, and generally speaking, activity is certainly worth a pawn. So I mean, what else does white play here? Let's say they go rook a d1 first. The idea is the same. You go for knight c5, and white already has to play a good move here to maintain the balance, because if you don't play bishop g3, then knight h5 is a problem because you hit this bishop and you undermine the defense of the d6 knight. So for example here, knight h5 will be winning. And you can't pin like this because, again, the knight hangs. Okay, so that is the classical system, and bishop d3 dealt with. The next move is probably the most complicated move, but don't worry. I'm going to guide you through it in some nice detail. So get a drink. So again, I'm not going to comment on these moves. We've seen all of this before. e4, d6 when e5, remember? Just lots of repetition if I can. Bishop d3. This is the normal way to play with when you plan to use the h3 setup castles and h3 here. So white is saying, I know that your plan is bishop g4, and I say, I'm going to stop it. But this move costs a tempo, and that is your cue when the white king is in the center to try to get to it. So this is one of the more fun lines for black, actually. So after h3, e6. You want to immediately threaten to open this e file. And after knight f3, takes is the best move. Although it does have its problems. So rook e8 check. Now white can play king f1. I don't think you'll face king f1 very often. It's, for example, it just ruins white's coordination. You can again play actively. They want to get the king to g2. This is just a sample line where you get your pieces in nice and logical. This b5 strike happens, and because white's king is weak, you can do this and you can start attacking. A huge compensation for black here. If they want to do something a bit more sane, like g3, again we go for this rook b8, knight b4 plan, and we're going to go b5 next, because we always have the weakness of the king to play against. Okay, so after rook e8 check, white has to be a little careful. Bishop e3 is best, developing a new piece. Bishop e2 doesn't make a lot of sense because we go for this bishop f5 plan, and we're going to trade pieces in this way instead, which is quite a common theme in these sort of structures. Well, if white denies you this square, you can bring the bishop here. Well, in this case, you're going to bring the knight in because the bishop is quite a good piece on e4. The bishop e3 is better, not giving up control of this diagonal, and we want to play concretely here. So we're desperate to exchange. We wouldn't really normally want to give up our good bishop, but you can play here the exchange sacrifice rook takes e3 and play for compensation. This is an option, but I mean, white is better here. There's no getting around it, and these kind of positions, they can be quite difficult to play. Like for example here, we're not even getting a pawn for the exchange, and white can, I mean, if white goes e4, you get quite good compensation straight away, because basically they've killed this bishop in order to save the pawn. But if they know to castle, which is the most dangerous line, taking the pawn is bad, so you basically get a worse version of what I've just shown you. And you don't really want to be trading pieces here as much, because obviously you're material down, so we're getting closer to a lost ending if we do that. So I recommend bishop h6 after castling, which is very critical, and also the most played, interestingly, in the Lichess database. I don't know if it's just a blunder or if it's just people know this. You take, but you do not take the pawn. Taking the pawn is very, very bad. I'll show you quickly. This, if you take, queen d2 happens, and because these pieces are all sleeping, white has huge compensation for the pawn. For example, queen h6, knight g5, and rook takes f6 already looks like a big issue to me. And this position is huge. I mean, you already have to start sacrificing material. This is not good. Queen e7 is much stronger because we want to take the queen. Good check. Now white's pretty much forced to push the pawn. The difference here, if they give you the pawn, is that, well, you don't take the pawn first of all, but the difference here is you haven't sacrificed an exchange on e3. We've basically got this. Give me a second. I'll find it. We've basically got this position, but we have a rook instead of a bishop, so we're not actually material down. So that's why. E4 is best. Knight bd7, and white goes for queen d2 most of the time, connecting the rooks. Very logical. Again, very simple rule. Trade a pair of knights. And take. And we want to do knight d7, queen e7, and knight into e5. And play a6, basically. This is a very straightforward way to play. Say white plays a natural move like rook a1, even though it's not the most played. For some reason this is a really bad move. I'm trying to figure out what have I done. No. No, bishop d7 was the bad move, so I can probably do the same plan here. Queen e7 is fine. Actually, no, we should be a little careful here. This is probably good to mention, actually. Rook a1. So white is sort of threatening to steamroll you with e5 if you back the queen off. Hence the reason why a better regroup here is something like knight h5. We're looking at these weak squares and we want to come back to g7. So if I just put a line in here, knight b5, say right in here, so rook d8, a little bit clumsy, but eventually we kick that knight away and we put our pieces back. g4, the knight has this nice g7 square, and this position is essentially equal. Okay, right. However, more natural to my eye is capturing with the c pawn, but this allows probably the most fun variation in the lines I'm going to show you. So we go b5. This is sort of a Benko gambit theme, where white is... We're basically playing against the fact that white has a castle to open the game, and after white takes, rook e8 castles, we take the pawn, we kick the knight. Here, because people are afraid of losing a pawn, you'll see knight a3 much more often. But this is quite easy. We take here, put the pieces on sensible squares, knight bd7 is fine, and black is fine here. I'll cover the pawn sacrifice as well, which is most critical. After you take the knight, it doesn't matter if they take back first or take on e8, bc3 is more popular because once you introduce this fork, they have to take on e8. And after rook b1, it's important to go knight d7. And white's best try is queen a4. But then you just play queen d8, which is a great move because you break the pin immediately, which is important. If you're ever in a pin, you should always try to break it, by the way. And then you do this and you trade some pieces. Bishop d7 is best. There's an only move lines here. Queen g5, we're threatening to take on h3. You probably don't need to know this much, but I'm just showing you that black can equalize at the end here. Okay. More solid for white. We're going to go again quickly through these moves. After bishop d3, we castle. h3, 6, 3, take fake. Without the pawn on c4, the q to go b5. Good. And after bishop b5, you have this little trick, knight takes e4. And this works because after the check, if white covers here, this is a very bad move. You can take with check, and you can recapture the bishop. And you're stopping white castling, and this position is huge for black. Already much better, in fact. And white can go down very quickly here if they're not careful. Like bishop e3 is the most played move, but already bishop a6, and you are never ever moving this queen from controlling the square. And black has such an easy plan here. Some sort of knight move around, maybe double the rooks, maybe sack on e3, and checkmate at some point is the most likely outcome. So white has to know to block with this knight. And get greedy and take a pawn. Again, not a super easy decision, but they can't castle, so the question is, what else do you play here with white? So everybody on lead chess takes this, and now we attack the knight. And now white absolutely has to keep it might look tempting to retreat like this, but after this check, white's in a horrible, horrible mess here because of the pin. And what we're going to do is play knight d7 to b6, pile up on this knight and just win it, basically. I mean, even bishop f5 is probably quite good here, although white can escape the worst of it by going king g1 here. But this is also good for black. But yes, so tempting but wrong. They have to play knight 2 c4, and then we just develop our pieces. And knight e5, trading a pair of knights is still good here. They take the knight, they go knight c4, queen a6, queen b3, bishop b7, targeting this pawn. And then according to the engine, this is the best way. Takes, c4. c4 is quite a nice move because it kind of stops white ever playing b3, and this makes it very difficult for them to develop the queen side. We sort of want to play rook fc8, rook ab8, and it's a bit like a very good benko. And white can never really move the queen because we take the d5 pawn, and black has more than enough compensation. Okay, right, so the next most popular thing for white to do, after we've covered all of the light square bishop moves, is to play in the style, after bishop e2, of what I call the Averbach. In fact, this is just a direct transposition to the King's Indian defense, Averbach variation with bishop e2 and bishop g5, where we played the main line basically, and c5 and d5 have happened. e6 is best. It's very, very similar to what we do. Queen d2 and we capture, and it's important to break the pin. Queen b6. And now there's a slightly computery line you have to remember. After knight f3, we go bishop f5, and although knight h4 looks like a problem, I mean, if anything else, again, this theme, knight e4, hitting bishop, hitting queen, trading the knight, it's exactly what we want. So that's good for black. So knight h4 is the best attempt, and we still go for knight e4, take. But it looks like here, after f3, that we have made a big mistake, because it looks like we have to retreat the bishop to f5 and have our pawn structure absolutely ruined. But we have a counter-attack here with h6. And h6 is super, super important because what we are basically doing here is we're tethering the queen and the bishop together. So we're overworking the queen because we lose this pawn. It's fine. But we take here, forcing the queen to leave, and then queen takes b2. And this works because white can't castle, because the bishop on e2 is hanging if they castle. As you can see, a lot of people do castle, and then you could take the bishop, but even better is to go bishop c2. And I think we're probably going to lead to the same, get to the same position. So after this, bishop c2, it's the only square for the bishop. Castle, rook e8, queen d2 back, and you have to remember one more move here, this nice queen f6, which counterattacks the knight and prepares to evacuate the bishop this way. So we couldn't evacuate the bishop on the last move because there was a pin here. And if white takes this bishop, actually black is a little better because we have this bad bishop in this pawn structure. I should probably put these in red. And yeah, the material is equal. Black has very nice squares for the knight, very good dark square control. It's perfect King's Indian. Okay, so g3 helps the knight. Bishop a4, f4, knight d7. Black is fine here. If you can, b5 is good to soften up this d5 pawn. And most of the time people go knight f3 here, b5. If they take it, you can just regain it. Knight b6 is probably also absolutely fine. Yeah, knight f6, so knight b6. And we're threatening to take here because we can take on e2, or we can do rook a. So we play a bad move here. So we play king g2, for example. This should also be working. This is also fine, as you can see. Although it's not the computer's top move, this is fine for black. And yeah, in fact, they have to give you the pawn. Taking here is a disaster. So, which is interesting. Probably because you have open file control here. So you can see it's very easy for white to go wrong here as well. So no problems for black in this line either. Now, you may remember at the start that I said I don't like the immediate Benoni attempt with e6 because of this 4 pawns. So we're going to look now at something that might be quite critical. d6 and f4. Big difference here though. This pawn is alive, so bishop b5 check is illegal. If white could play bishop b5 check here, then yeah, black would probably be in a similar situation to the previous line. Not busted, but +1 position for white. But this is just harmless now because it's a 4 pawns attack. And after knight f3, e6, bishop e2, which is the main line. I'll show you that bishop d3, although is not the best move because you can take, and essentially there's loads of good good moves here. But c4 is the nice one, which hits the bishop, and then b5 again. Bishop takes b5, knight takes e4. We've already seen this trick, take and check. Now knight c3, and take the bishop. And black is better here. I'd say better. I think given one more move, you're definitely better. Oops, not this one. Yeah, so black is very good to go here. But that's not the main line. Main line is bishop e2 when we take. If white takes back with the e pawn, which is less common in this structure because it leaves you this ugly f pawn. If you have f and e pawns, you kind of want to keep them together. We'll see this when we study the Grand Prix attack. Bishop f5. So we take control of the e4 square and we just jump in. It is easy equality. I mean, slight preference for black here, of course, because once we've achieved this trade, this bishop is a monster. We have good squares for all our pieces. We have a6, b5 plan. We can control the e file. Put the queen somewhere sensible, maybe even f6 in the structure. And yeah, black is good to go. So white takes with the c pawn for that reason. We go rook e8. E5 is one of the only ways to justify this. White just protects. We have a trick. Take. You can see that protecting is quite common. So I'll go through this. Take, and we have the pin. White holds on to the knight, but this doesn't really matter. You can probably play h6 here. Sorry, you shouldn't play h6 here. This is important, knight a6, and you want to go knight b4. G4 never works here because after you take and take, knight b4, queen b1, you have the check. So this is pretty nice, and black has a big attack here. Okay, so e5 is critical. We take, and knight g4, and white has to give up a pawn. Because if they protect, we take it anyway, because we've got 3 pieces on it. So yeah, this is just a pawn. Bishop g5 is the most common move, and we go queen b6, normal square here. Now, if white's not a little careful here, we can maybe have some nasties on f2. And now castling is best, but we just take the pawn. And white has to play like a computer not to be worse here. So as you can see, already the most common move, bishop c4, bishop f5, covering f7 and d6. Sorry, the most common move, d6. Black is just a little better here because it's very difficult to hang on to this pawn. h1, it's just very difficult. All these pieces are overworked. There's no d7. Black has the d8 square under control anyway, so this is just a very good position for black. Borderline winning. So they have to do it via this move order, d6. And you can play with bishop f5 here and try to get a transposition to the last line. In fact, why don't we do this here? Bishop f5 is good. It's okay. So this is the idea. So they have knight d5 here, which is a bit more unclear. But you can play like this. This is also, I'll put this in as an alternative. So easier is to just take the pawn, force white to find some more moves. So bishop e5, we want to come to d4 with check. White keeps the pressure up and forces us to play bishop e6, which gives them just enough compensation, unfortunately. And after knight c6, the most challenging move, rook d7, we check them. And then bishop f2 is a really nice idea because if we take, they're going to have access to this knight f6, bishop h6, and then they're going to mate us. But we have rook f8 exploiting here, and after knight f6 we take. They need to take here. They take with the bishop, rook f7 is good. Black is better. So they need to do this, and after b5, removing the pawn from the attack, White gets the pawn back, and we should get a draw after this. But the best white can do here is a draw, either taking and playing rook c7, or this creative computer line, which is rook e3, c4, bishop f6, and this perpetual with a draw. Okay. Now we're moving on to options which are a little rarer, but we're basically covering off all the King's Indian structures that we haven't already. So pawn to d4, we've seen all this already. e4, d6, f3, playing in the style of the same-ish, but this is not the most popular line for white in the same-ish, so black is very much fine here. e6, and then bishop e3 is most common, most challenging. Taking on d5 is fine. This rare little move is fine. Forcing a4, maybe the weakness of the b4 square will be useful later on. We can take and castle. And after queen d2, we go for this. Well, I mean, knight bd7 is fine here. Rook e8 looks useful. I had a game like this recently where sacrifices become possible on e4 in certain positions. So bishop e2, trying to get the pieces out. Note that knight g2 is not so good, although this is probably the most common idea. Sorry, knight g2, because the knight kind of gets in the way a bit more than the bishop does. At least the bishop can easily get to d1 and then allow the knight to develop. Whereas if you do it this way, most players will go to g3, and you have this common theme with a knight on g3, knights on g3, b3, b6. g6, always look out for this h5 thrust, which threatens h4. White really doesn't want to play h4 because then this knight becomes a bit of a liability. And here we force the knight to a bad square, and we play on the queen side, and black is doing well here. Queen c7 after bishop e2 is good. Sort of maybe we're hinting that we want to play c4, so we're taking control of the square in advance. And in the lead chess database, white is playing g4 here, and probably with the idea to castle queenside. So I just develop naturally. Say that white castles long. This is normally not a great idea. I just, b5. It's too weak. The king's far too weak. So black is essentially winning here, which is nice. After queen c7. And the reason we play this sort of waiting move is because we don't want the knight getting here. You want to be able to take this knight off. Very important theme. So queen c7 waits, and white plays some random move that's not knight h3. We can do this. We can do most things. Knight bd7 maybe not so good. h5 is useful if you want to play h5. We wait for white to launch an attack, and then what I talked about, this little move that frees up the c5 square. We put the knight eventually on c5, and this is just a computer line to show best play for both sides. We get a position that's very playable for black, but the position is a mess. Okay, that's the same-ish, not very common. We'll go through some more not very common lines a bit more quickly. This is a line that exists in the King's Indian as well. The normal idea is to do this sort of thing. Maybe so that's why we wait to castle. After knight g3, we very logically stop white's plan. And after bishop e2, we can do knight h7, which is good. It's not a novelty in lead chess, but this is a nice move. We kind of want to hint at trading the knight maybe, or maybe trading this dark square bishop, because we might want to lock the position and put all the pawns on dark squares. So we do this, get the pieces out. f5 is a useful thrust, and we can even be very ambitious here, but you really don't need to do this. I think f4 is probably fine here as well. Knight g5 is good. f4 is not good. Yeah, of course, actually, there's opening the g file's bad, but knight g5 is good here as well. You can play some waiting moves as well. Like, the position is just a bit funky, a bit alternative. Not a very common way for white to play, so I wouldn't worry too much about this analysis. This is just put here in case you really want to go very deep. It's possible to play like this. Nobody will ever play this. Bishop d3 and knight g2 is a bit more common, maybe. So we'll cover this. So here we're castling. And now, of course, with knight on e2, he's getting out of these bishop g4 ideas because f3 would then just make this bishop look rather silly. So when we can't play bishop g4, we go for our e6 plan. We take on d5, and then we have a think. Knight b d7 and a6, threatening b5, b8. And then this plan is quite nice in this position. We're kind of wanting to go knight c7 and b5. And this is a useful regrouping. Sometimes also f5 can be an option. So knight c7, white attacks d6, which is this sort of Achilles heel in our position, and we go for this b5 line. So we do all of this, and we have a fine position. We want to follow up with, oops, not this, with rook b7 to neutralise this rook. And black's position is fine. You have a nice active dark square bishop here. Okay, finally, I mentioned this earlier as well about the plan, and the reason I didn't recommend in this move order c5, because it gives white loads of extra options, but mainly the plan that I don't like, which after we'll go through some moves here, e4, say castle, oh sorry, d6, then e5 of course. I mean, first of all, they have this plan, which is not fantastic. I never like allowing this in bishop d7. But really the reason I don't like this is because after, say, you go bishop e2, castle, they have this regrouping knight d2 to c4, which is quite annoying against our normal plan of e6. Also with knight d2, of course, they're stopping bishop g4 because that square's controlled twice by these two pieces. But this can be a little irritating after castles with taking, say they take, and you're fine because this d5 pawn's quite weak, but also white has a little bit of a nibble here. And you can see if you don't trade this off immediately, then you are just in trouble because bishop f4 can come with a d6 pawn force. So this is why I don't recommend this kind of move order. I think it gives white more options. But after c4, c5's fine. And then they can try doing the same thing. So it does this to prevent bishop g4 basically, but we just do this, knight a6, and we're waiting. We're kind of just waiting to see what white does. We might go knight c7, a6, b5 is the idea. And if white prevents the b5 plan, we can do this. We can also, now that white is weak in this b4 square, put the knight onto b4. This is fine. If white goes aggressive, then you can take here, because this is never good. When you can take and play knight b4, there's just too many weaknesses here. So if you take and they take back, you can now go for this sort of harassment plan with bishop g4, queen b3, and this knight sits quite nicely on b4. These two jumps are quite annoying, and white doesn't really have a way of pushing e5 here because the pawn just falls. Like in this position, this is just a lost pawn. And not to mention a huge position for black because these pieces are so awkward. So this kind of plan from white is very radical. It's, like I say, knight d2, it's very much stopping bishop g4. Interestingly enough, the computer wants you to play this anyway, so there you go, you can do that if you want. But this plan that I've shown you with e6, playing a few waiting moves, is quite good. So summaries, and the way I want to summarize is just to give you some pointers. So let's just create a chapter. So number one, wait for white to play c4 before we play c5 to deny the c4 square, and knight d2 to c4. Okay. 2, if bishop g4 if white plays bishop d3, which is what we saw in the first chapter, bishop g4 is often a good plan. And we'll talk about a little bit about exchanges. Black would like to exchange the light squared bishop. Oops. Oh, squared bishop. And a pair of knights. This structure. Typical Benoni structure with e takes d5. Plan is to occupy the e file. And if we go for the typical Benoni structure with c takes d5, the plan is to occupy, sorry, not to occupy, is to play a6 and b5. Sometimes b5 is available immediately as a pawn sacrifice. Anything else that's really important, the 4 pawns attack, back lines, both transpose two main lines of the King's Indian, which are considered harmless for black. Yes, so that is pretty much it. Have I missed anything? We've been same-ish. So I'll put a quick rule in for the same-ish. In same-ish structures, you do not want to allow white play knight h3, so don't develop knight b d7 too early. So like I just draw the arrow there. You want to be able to chop this off. We'll go through the rules and put sort of paint on the board so you can see what I'm talking about. So c4, you want d4 and c4 to be played before we play c5. That's rule 1. In the lines, the most common that you'll face where white puts the pawn center here like this and plays bishop d3, then this bishop g4 plan is normally quite good. This is normally the ideal square for the bishop. And the reason for that is because you lack space even. I combine squares and space then into squace. So I've invented a new word tonight. So yeah, you both want the d7 square, so you need to play bishop g4 to exchange off the light square bishop, so you can place your knight on d7. And that works best in the bishop d3 lines. When bishop e2, remember we had that really quick e4, e5 plan for white with the bishop on f3, which puts, unfortunately, the rook hangs in that line, so you have to be a bit careful about playing bishop g4 in bishop e2 lines. Exchanges, I'll just say these two guys, ideally. You want to trade this for this. Let's find another color. You want to trade this for the other one. Or anything really, either any of these. I mean, best of all, dark square bishop, because then you get an unopposed dark square bishop. And you want to be left with these guys, or the other knight. It doesn't matter which knight you trade. All knights are created equal. So, exchanges, we've done that. Rule number 4, typical Benoni structures. So, with e takes d5, you want to occupy the e file, so you want to play like rook e8, knight d7 into e5 perhaps, queen e7, these kind of ideas. And with c takes d5, you have access to a6 and b5. Sometimes in the lines where white hasn't castled especially, and you have pressure on the e4 pawn, you play b5 immediately, which is quite nice. 4 pawns attack, like I said, where white has 4 pawns across here, not dangerous because bishops can't jump over pawns unlike knights, so there's no bishop b5 check, and you just play a mainline King's Indian where you've already got good play. You want to hack at the center and win a pawn, and then white has to play quite accurately there. And then final thing with the sameish, like I said, just don't allow that knight to develop to h3, and you should be absolutely fine. Positional systems with the knight on e2. I'll just put knight g2 systems on rare, but don't allow the knight g3 h4 to h5 plan. Just play h5 and black is fine. And you can develop pieces in any way that you want in that line. The sort of recommendations that were given there were just a bit funky. Okay, if there are any questions, then please let me know. Write me an email. These are summary files, so feel free, take them away, add more lines. The useful thing to do is to add your own gains to these files. And yeah, I wish you the best of luck and great results in playing the Benoni Indian. And please let me know how you get on. All right, that'll do for today. Thanks very much. Bye.